Okay, well, welcome everyone to another episode of the None of Our Businesses show and podcast. I have with me here Drs. Kim and Todd Saxton. We are doing this via Zoom, and we would have done this via Zoom in any case, even though we're in the midst of the COVID-19, because Drs. Saxtons they're professors, award-winning professors at Indiana's University Kelley School of Business. They're the co-authors of the Titanic Effect, which we'll talk a bit about here today. And that book is a very practical guide to helping startup founders and investors and different constituents successfully navigate the icebergs that so often sink startups in their early stages. Our guests are also startup co-founders themselves, angel investors, and advisors professionally. So I think we're going to have lots of great and interesting things to talk about here. And I'd love to get started by saying welcome and maybe giving the two of you an opportunity to talk a little about your background as educators and as co-founders, and maybe kind of an initial introduction to the book.
Thanks. Well, first, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us. I'll kind of kick it off a little bit, going back in our professional history, wind back a little bit to when we met. So we were at the same consulting firm in the DC area coming out of undergraduate, and we did business consulting for a variety of larger firms, market research, competitive analysis, acquisition and alliance support, things along those lines. We did that for 6 years. That's when we got married, and then went back to school to get our PhDs and took the professorial route. So I think that origin of the consulting work has always given us a little bit of a practical orientation, and that's what we tried to reflect in the book.
Yeah, and Indianapolis is a small, big town. So, it's the big town in the United States, but we often say there's not 6 degrees of separation, it's 2. And after you've been here for 20 years, it's maybe not even 2. I mean, it's hard to go to the airport and not see somebody, And so we've been very active in the community because of that practical look that we take by, being a part of the venture community. And we just have got to watch a lot of startups and would-be startups and were startups and the like. And what we noticed over 20 years is we kept seeing similar mistakes, if you will, happening over and over again. And so we were like, we should tell people about these mistakes. I mean, we're professors anyway. That's one of the things we like to do. But also when you're a startup founder, you're so excited about what you're trying to accomplish. It doesn't always hit you that you don't really often know that much about business. And so these are just like, you couldn't possibly have known better because this is the first time you've done something. And so we did a presentation and people loved it. And somebody walked up to us and said, you should write a book. And we said, oh, that's an interesting idea. And so we wrote a book.
What's interesting, I think, in terms of connecting it to the current environment, COVID, et cetera, a big impetus for writing the book was helping founders, particularly of high growth or high potential startups, kind of the terminology we use is navigating that uncertainty, and the metaphor of the Titanic, which is prominent in our title. But pretty much every business right now is facing tremendous uncertainty moving forward, and particularly your audience, those who support them or maybe are running their own businesses. I think the framework can have some applicability to the kinds of decisions that we need to make under uncertainty, and some of the icebergs that we want to help people avoid making as they navigate through that uncertainty. And we can talk more about the framework and the metaphor, et cetera, but I think there's relevance to actually a broader kind of set of organizations than just startups getting going in today's world, for better or for worse.
Yeah, so I think that you've kind of laid out the title, the Titanic Effect, and so that you're drawing some parallels there between the issues that startups face when they launch and navigating the seas there. I know that the book kind of has a framework with, is it 32
Yeah.
different, 32 different points of in the
Iceberg.
framework to look at. Yeah. But are there a few that you would maybe highlight that are of particular relevance during this particular time as being the most common sources of failure in your experience?
I'll pull one out of the marketing ocean, which is actually Kim's area of expertise. But I think one of the challenges that startups face is the value void, that they think they can solve a problem for the customer, but they don't either fully understand that problem or can't articulate the value that they provide. And we're seeing a lot of businesses, both essential but particularly non-essential, really struggle with that. How do we create value for all of our constituents, but particularly our customers? How do we connect with them, re-engage with them in new and different ways? So very simple ones, obviously, are things like restaurants who can deliver food or have takeout and set that up in a nice, seamless way. But I think a lot of even non-tourism related, non-restaurant related businesses are struggling with that. And I think the lessons from the chapter, and Kim can fill in some of the gaps here, but kind of being empathetic, understanding the job you're doing for your customer, particularly in today's environment, and how you can pivot or add functionality that makes it easier for them to survive and thrive during this time is something that is very important. Certainly something we're trying to do with our students and our colleagues, and I know a lot of teachers out there are being forced to do that.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest examples of that is simply, a lot of small businesses have not been very tech friendly or e-commerce friendly. And so now, I'm watching one Mexican restaurant here posting on Facebook, we'll sell you 40-ounce margaritas to go. You have to drive over here. You have to get out of your car, give us your money, and then you can take the margaritas with you. Not really understanding where their customers are coming from at this point in time. What they want to do is they want to go online and place an order and have you run it out to their trunk, and they don't have to get out of their car. So rethinking how you create value, and if you create value. I mean, one of the things we're seeing with a number of startups is that they've got some really interesting, innovative ideas, but people don't have time for them now. I mean, there's the pain point that they feel is not really important right now. And so what do you do? What do you do with your salespeople? You have pay them to make fun videos? I mean, yes, that's a different way of thinking about value, right? But I saw one startup that I thought was pretty clever. Now they are an online training platform for employers for like onboarding and training people. And now being online, that's like totally amazingly relevant. And so I'm sure they're very busy, but one of the things they did is they put together little customer care packages, called up their customers and asked them, "Hey, can we mail this to your house? Give us your house address." And then they thought about, they had 3 different varieties. Like one was a game, one was cocktails, one was, I think, like bath salts. With all their branding and all their messaging and saying, hey, we're here for you and do what you need and let us know how we can help. So rethinking how you add value to customers, I think is a really important time. And I think for those businesses who aren't really busy right now, this is an incredible exercise to go through. Ask yourselves, go ask your customers, how do you want us to add value? What problems can we better solve for you? What ways didn't we not think of before that we could do the same thing for you in a more effective manner? Because we don't know what the new normal is going to be, right? Mm-hmm. We know that half of us are going to, roughly half, let's just call it that way, with 2 camps. Never want to do anything online again. Want to do everything online from here on out, right? How are you going to be positioned to help and support customers that are from both of those camps in the future?
Yeah, a couple of things that I can relate to. I think that with my client base, for some of them, it is like, this is a tremendous time to engage in that strategic planning. Things are shut down, particularly with some venture-backed companies where there's cash in the bank. They can't operate but the cash is there. And so they know they will operate when they can return to some sense of normalcy or pivot to whatever comes next. And so they have kind of a rare opportunity for the management team to actually have the time to, since they can't operate, they may as well like sit down and like really do some of that more deep strategic planning, and not only in the context of what might be different coming out of this crisis, but also projects they've had on the back burner that they just haven't had time to look at.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we're also encouraging people to do some scenario planning. So what if we're back in a month? What if we're back in 3 months? What if we're back in 6 months? That whatever those plans are, roadmap them so that you can be looking at metrics and know when to pull what trigger, so that you're not, turning on sales teams when we're not there yet, right? But also not that PF people are calling and there's no sales team, right? So you need some guideposts that say, when I see this is happening, then I'm going to do that.
Yeah, you were talking about that kind of opportunity for strategic thinking. We've been encouraging the companies that we work with and our students who are working at organizations to kind of think about it like a virtual grand reopening. What does that look like, and when, and how do you position yourself to very quickly get traction and momentum when that happens? And it's not going to be kind of a light switch where all of a sudden the economy's back on and everybody's going out to restaurants and going to sporting events, et cetera. It's going to be rolling over time. So when that is for your organization and how you engage with your stakeholders, which is why we are encouraging more of a virtual grand reopening as opposed to a physical one. Yeah, we're going to have a party and everybody over, because that unfortunately is probably unlikely. But I think that kind of mindset of it's an opportunity to reboot and come out stronger, leaner, and faster. What does that look like, and how do we hit the ground running?
I love that. Yeah, the virtual grand reopening. I mean, I thought about it in my own business, in my consulting practice, where we did a lot of stuff virtually anyway. And the challenge for us has been, well, let's not take that for granted. What is it? Because it would be very easy to just kind of slip into, well, we already have the tools, we already been doing it, let's just kind of do things the same way we would have done before, somewhat virtually. And so really trying to challenge ourselves to rethink, okay, what does our business look like? Does our business look any different in these circumstances? And what does that look like going forward? And how can we make a deal out? How can we make something out of that to get some attention as well? Yeah.
It might even be value added, right? That is chargeable for. So your value proposition could change depending on how you package that up.
Yeah, right. Yeah, one of the things that stood out to me about some of what I read about your work was the critical challenge of product market fit. And I think you kind of used a different term a few minutes ago in terms of the value void. Are those two things related in this case? Are they kind of different aspects? I'd love to kind of hear your thought on that.
Sure. So and it's great that you picked that up, and we kind of in two different chapters. So just lay out the framework a little bit. Titanic Effect overall kind of maps into what we call 4 oceans. So we've got the human ocean, the people involved, whether that's investors, co-founders, and your early employees. The technical ocean, which is all about the product and decisions around development, design, and eventually production. The marketing ocean, which deals with customer segmentation and understanding your market, delivering value proposition and differentiation. And then the last piece is the strategy ocean that kind of ties everything else together. So product market fit kind of overlaps between 2 oceans, the technical ocean and the marketing ocean. And the kind of technical equivalent that we talk about in the technical ocean is the false hope Detberg. So that's where, you go and show your family members and they're like, oh, that's great, Johnny, nice job. This is going to be really cool. And then nobody buys it, right? And there's that false hope that you get from not getting an honest appraisal and candid feedback. And often that goes along with that value void Detberg in the marketing ocean, that you've convinced yourself that you're solving an important problem for the customer. but the reality is there's a value void. They either aren't willing to pay for it, or they've already solved that problem in their own way. And it may not look like your solution, but they are still overcoming the challenge that problem presents in a different way. And getting that nuance of product market fit, what is the right set of solutions? How do we effectively start to build, but then test that early with our market, and understanding the value proposition from the customer's perspective, getting their feedback and input in the design process, see how they break it. And in some research we've seen recently, even with software, that can take as much as an average of 4 years to actually really come to a firm understanding of that. And it's often not until you get that product market fit that you can really start to scale your business and grow it more rapidly. So very related, and I would say the value void is one piece of that product market fit kind of puzzle.
Well, and you left the market part out, which is that different customers might see different types
Absolutely.
of value and want different functionality. And so it is iterative between the marketing and the technical ocean, that you got to figure out who would have this problem. What's the exact problem they have, and how do we build something for that problem that they'll pay for? And that's kind of the idea with a customer value void, is you might have a solution, but are people going to be willing to pay for it? And I mean, if you ask some venture capitalists, they'll say, in order to have a scalable startup, your product has to offer 10 times the functional benefits of all previous solutions. Well, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's 5 times. Maybe if it's a really big problem, it can only be 2 times, but it can't be no incremental benefit. And sometimes we see entrepreneurs get really excited, but you don't like to be the Nancy naysayer. But you're like, is anyone going to pay for that?
It's actually a very simple test, right? If you think you have a product that has value, there are 2 people who can write you checks: investors and customers. And if after 6 months you haven't been able to get a check or even a letter of intent or promise from a customer to be your customer, it's likely that you're off track. It's likely that there's a value void there, and you are hitting that false hope debt berg.
I think when you talk about the false hope debt berg, it reminds me of a challenge that I faced in my own entrepreneurial journeys, and I was relating it to a young person who was going to partner with me in providing services. And maybe because I've always kind of been mostly in the professional service environment, that might lead to this particular issue. But when it comes to false hope, this young partner was saying to me, well, I'm all in. I'm good with, we'll try this. And if it doesn't work after a year, I understand. I'm entrepreneurial enough. I understand. If it does work, then great. And my answer back to him is, I said, well, in my experience, that would be wonderful if it really was that binary. But what often happens, and I've experienced it myself, is it actually does work just enough to keep you on the hook, but then you can't get, you can never really scale or go anywhere with it. Right. And so you're making a living out of it, and now you're stuck because it's kind of working, but not as much as you wanted it to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been recently involved with a new product launch, and it's the same thing. It's like, yes, there's positive market reaction, but not as much as you would hope. It's sort of, and so then one of the questions you also have to ask yourself is time and marketing effort. So if you're asking a group of people to change their behavior, it takes them a little time, and it takes them hearing that message. The rule we use in marketing is 5 plus or minus 2 times. So somewhere between 3 and 7. So if you haven't kind of asked to close 7 times, then you need more time. And so what we did is say, all right, well, we're going to look at this point in time and this point in time and this point in time. And let's just see what our indicators are. And if after, X amount of time, that third check, we're not seeing it, then we're just going to pull the plug and say, hey, we were before our time. Because we've seen that too with startups. Sometimes you're just before your time, before people are really ready. And then you maybe come back at it another point in time. But you're right, it's not binary. It's not an on-off switch. It's there's some interest, just not enough interest to make money at.
Yeah, it's funny when you look at statistics on the number of, quote, failed ventures. And I would guess that 90% of those, if you ask the entrepreneur, they'd just say, it's just on the back burner for a little while. That, yeah, I haven't called a customer. I haven't put a cent or a day into developing a product around it, but it's not dead. I mean, eventually I'll do something with that in some new form or whatever. So the whole definition, it's not binary, despite the fact that as entrepreneurship researchers, my colleagues and I, we have to have some kind of metric, and that's one that we often run with. Similarly, there are very few kind of these overnight success stories, right? A lot of them are built off of either past failure or a slow boil kind of idea that hits some kind of inflection point. And I actually wanted to come back to that because you asked about concepts from the book that might relate to today's environment. And I think it's particularly relevant with those ventures that are just kind of hanging on. And one of the industry growth models, this is not ours, it's been around for a while, it's called Crossing the Chasm. And it's where you have this market growth that just kind of stalls, and it maybe stalls at a relatively low to modest level of engagement. Maybe it's mostly just the pioneers, kind of the leading edge customers that embrace it. And then all of a sudden, you have some kind of event, often driven externally, that allows you to kind of bridge that chasm and get rapid market uptake. So a few examples that the current environment are driving, certainly e-education, right? We've got, using Zoom, using other technologies, we've got just an explosion by necessity. And the reality is that while there had been some e-learning and some decent e-learning platforms, it was still a relatively small percent of the overall education market. Well, right now it's the majority of the education market, and it's likely to settle back at a much higher level or baseline than was true before. The same of telehealth, right? I mean, you think about virtual health, the regulations that are changing on an almost daily basis that enable virtual care coordination and collaboration. And those tools have been in place, but they haven't been embraced because of kind of the traditional doctor-patient relationship, and all of that is being upended. So for those kind of markets, there's this inflection point right now that maybe things have been on a slow boil, but what parts of your market or your company might face that crossing the chasm moment where, yes, it's going to be challenging, but you can actually, again, emerge from this and poised, ready to take advantage of market changes that will be perhaps in a beneficiary of a new model.
One of the things I'm hoping as a marketer that we see, particularly with small businesses, is that they really get their arms around their customer database. It's hard to put together a customer database, and a lot of small businesses don't do it because you've got to mix and match data, and you don't like, databases anyway. But now, oh my gosh, if you knew who your most loyal customers were over the last 3 years, wow, right? I mean, you would be reaching out to them and communicating with them and offering them things, and they would be helping and supporting you because, I mean, for example, we go to the same Mexican restaurant every week. We do not want it to go away. Right?
That's funny. Yeah, it's today's Friday, and that's usually the day that I go to the Mexican restaurant for enchiladas and margaritas. And so, yeah, we've been patronizing them through Grubhub and
Right.
Doing what we can to make sure they stay there. But yeah, it's great.
But I mean, they know when you walk in the door, but they don't know you in a way.
Right.
I mean, they could have been emailing you, and they, could have done something special for you, and you do something special for them. It's just, I just hope people get their databases together. I mean, people are so happy.
And you probably have some time to do that, right? Take whatever spreadsheets you have, your fishbowl of business cards, now's the time to invest some time and energy in assembling that database. Bless you, by the way.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Well, thanks. And for those in your audience, again, appreciate you listening in, and also good luck navigating these challenging times for everybody, and hopefully you'll emerge stronger on the other side.
Thank you. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another podcast, YouTube show during the coronavirus situation. We are coming to you from home with another roundtable panel discussion of several good, interesting articles, timely articles, and so maybe we'll kick it off with. AJ, you just look like you're ready to go.
I am ready, dude. I'm so excited. Now, yeah, this week's been crazy. So just the amount of small business stuff that's come out this week has been big. And the big one is the small business lending that's going on, and basically what's amounts to a forgivable grant or a forgivable loan, operating grant. And so this SBA loan has been going on. The article that I have is from Politico, and it's a little bit older because the program launched today, but even this was 2 days ago or a day ago, they were already warning of a chaotic launch to this small business lending program. And one of the reasons is because the regulations and everything associated with it have been so new that banks and everybody else haven't had a chance to really get an understanding of what's needed for the applications and how those applications are. And as of recording, actually, today is the first day that you were able to apply for these and that it opened up for everybody. And so I know that like Ty and Charlie, you have experience actually with doing this application or attempting to do this application. So I was kind of wanting to get like a frontline report from you guys maybe on the challenges you were running into, because as the article suggests, and as I've been hearing, it's been a rough launch to this small business lending program. Maybe if you guys can give a little bit of background on, what the requirements are, what the calculations are. I don't know if you want to get into that much, but just give us an idea of what it is and how your experiences with it went.
Yeah, I'll start out by giving kind of just a rough thumbnail sketch of the program. And just to clarify, as of today, we're sitting here Friday on April 3rd, and it was supposed to be available today, but it's administered through banks. And so most banks actually didn't have their applications ready for customers yet. And so that's part of the roughness of rolling it out. Probably predictable though. I mean, I think when we knew that banks were going to have it supposedly, or it was supposed to be ready by today, I wasn't hopeful that would be the case. So the PPP program, as it's called, Charlie, do you remember what the 3P stand for?
Paycheck Protection Program.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. So both Charlie and I have been working on this for our clients, and the thing is, in general, the way it's supposed to work is that you have a calculation of your average monthly payroll. You apply for a loan that's 2.5 times that average monthly payroll. That gives you a certain amount of funding, and then from there, that is a pretty generous loan in terms of the payment terms. You get to defer paying that back quite a bit, and then you also get a pretty low interest rate on it. I think as of today, the interest rate that I heard was like 1% or something like that. So pretty favorable terms on that loan. But the real favorable thing on that is that then if you spend the loan on qualifying expenses, which would include payroll and some things like rent and utilities as some of the key expenses, some of what you spend on qualifying expenses then will be forgivable, and so it essentially will become like free money to the company. The company does have to certify that they're facing uncertainty due to the coronavirus situation and the economic conditions in order to, as part of the qualifying eligibility requirements. But really, I mean, I think every company is facing uncertainty here, and so that particular requirement and the way it's set up kind of leaves this open to all small businesses. It is small business oriented, and so one of the key kind of hurdles or areas that has been of contention is small startup companies that are venture backed, because there are affiliate rules based on who your ownership is that could loop your company in with being grouped with your venture partners who may have other portfolio companies, And so when you claim to be a small company, you may not really be considered a small company. And how those exact affiliate rules works is not entirely clear, because there's some kinds of facts and circumstances, reasoning behind whether an investor in your company is considered to have control or not. So lots of lawyers and companies and VCs have been debating and looking at that issue pretty hard this week. And I think it's also been a topic between congressional members and Mnuchin about if there's anything they can do to straighten that up, because that of course affects a big chunk of the economy that could be helpful to get those loans to keep people on payroll. So that's some background. I've been working with some of our clients on getting them ready for it. From an accountant's perspective, it's, ultimately it's an application that goes to the bank. So we can't really do it. It's not like a tax return. We don't prepare and sign off on something in that way for a client with regard to this, but we can help clients figure out if it's worthwhile to spend time on it or not, which is what we've kind of been doing. Charlie, maybe you have some other thoughts on that or experience you might share?
Sure. Yeah. So my experience with it has been basically two things. It's been prepping the application form, arguing with various people about what counts for eligible costs inside of the calculation. It's been then going to the bank's websites and calling them and whatnot and getting on the phone with them, but then going to their websites and finding that it's not up, not ready, and then kind of like anxiously getting all of your ducks in a row so that when it is ready, you can be the first one to get in there and get it done. But yeah, that's been everything you said. Sounds pretty much like the same experience that I've had. I've also looked into a couple of the other different options. I know there's been some talk about that there are certain businesses that can make better use of other tax benefits that are available through the plan, but it seems pretty rare in comparison because the payroll protection program sounds so, like you said, the forgivability of the loan is such a huge characteristic that it's hard to get past that. But yeah, it's one of those things where the other thing I found was that a lot of sites are just giving incorrect information. So I found like conflicting sites that both seem pretty authoritative. So I just want to urge everybody to, to check around, get qualified advice, and be sure that you know what you're putting on it. Because yeah, there's a lot of misinformation going around it right now.
Yeah, and I would say even the banks who you would think should know, but they're getting information in real time on this too. So we have to forgive them a little bit if they misstep with some of the information they provide. Really, if you want the most up-to-date, accurate information that you know is exactly technically correct, it would be the Treasury's website. So the Treasury website has some information on the PPP program. It also has something called the final interim rules, which sounds like a paradoxical title. They're both final and interim. They published yesterday, and so what the Treasury has is the kind of the real official technical guidance. And so I would point people to that website for that information. Until it's not over till it's over. You just keep working it, and we'll see how it all kind of plays out as we go forward. I think some of the angst over it is that, I forget the number, but wasn't it like $350 billion that was set aside in the CARES Act for this program? And so that's a specific dollar amount, right? Which implies that the SBA could reach that amount and then stop providing these loans. And so that's what creates some angst over people thinking, oh, we got to be some of the first ones to submit our applications, and creating this kind of gold rush of sorts. But as a practical matter, and I would say, ideally and hopefully, what we've seen in other programs in the past is that when something like that is oversubscribed, usually the government goes back and then raises the amount that they're approving for such a program. So yeah, I wouldn't kill anyone to get to the front of the line on this. It's not.
And then the other thing that just goes in line with being patient on it is that I've read that a lot of the banks are taking the applications and they're allowing you to submit them and they're retaining that information, but they're not necessarily processing that to the SBA. And so that's kind of another indicator that maybe rushing isn't as much to your benefit as you might think.
Right, exactly.
I also wanted to point out that, like, I've heard from some colleagues that are working in the public accounting sector that it's kind of unprecedented trying to get information out to clients because it has been such a short turnaround and so many like little changes are coming out. This isn't like an accounting or a tax pronouncement or law that went in where there's been months of deliberation and kind of combing through the details. It really is, as fast as the information is coming out, people are reporting on it, and kind of, you know, everybody's in the same boat trying to understand it. There's nobody that's a certified expert at it yet, or has had the chance to really dive in and look at all the minute details yet, because they keep changing. Like you mentioned, the Treasury website updated, I think today, the 3rd, kind of the interim final rules. And so those just came out today, and kind of the information, the speed at which this stuff is coming out, I guess, has been really staggering and kind of overwhelming, I think, for a lot of people out there.
Yeah. Yeah, those interim rules I was talking about just came out yesterday on the 2nd versus today on the 3rd. But yeah, the point well taken that information is coming fast and furious, and if you're using, and that's why I recommend people go straight to the Treasury website for their best source of information, because if you're getting your information from a secondary or third source, their ability to update from the primary sources is going to be somewhat limited as fast as information is coming out right now.
What do you got, Charlie?
Yeah, so kind of staying on topic, I've got another article from Yahoo Finance talking about what will everything look like after the coronavirus. And so this is kind of a theme we're seeing in a lot of different articles, of course, but yeah, they talked about some changes that we all kind of know might happen, but I wanted to kind of pontificate on them a little bit. Talked about how, for example, airlines probably aren't going to recover ever to the same level that they were before, because there's a lot of stigma about that it feels like it feels like a very susceptible industry to this kind of problem. It talked about how independent restaurants were likely to be shut down as a result of this, because it's hard for them to stay open during this time, but that fast food might have the cash to kind of weather that storm. Talked about how drive-through movies are kind of making a resurgence in some areas as people are trying to find ways to kind of revitalize the entertainment industry in this new sort of world that we're in. And so there's a few other interesting things. It said that like virtual concerts were raising in popularity quite a bit, and so people are like watching their favorite singers, you know, via their phones. But then there were a few things that I brought up that I thought were maybe a little humorous, but they had like, they said that Walmart had been selling more tops than it had been selling bottoms, because everyone's trying to go to these Zoom meetings, and so they just want to look presentable from the waist up. And that popsicle stick sales, I guess, are through the roof because everyone is at home trying to do crafts with their kids, trying to play teacher. And so I guess I just wanted to kind of think out loud here about how different industries are going to react and what industries might be, you know, in danger once this whole thing blows over.
I got to admit, when I first saw this article, I was thinking more along the lines, and something that I've been thinking about lately is like culturally or interactively how things are going to change after the virus. And I'm wondering, you know, like the business handshake, it's always been like a really big thing, or in an introduction, I remember when you were going to job fairs or they were talking about job prep, how essential it was for a firm, yet, you know, not overly aggressive handshake when you're making first contact with somebody and try and establish rapport, or, you know, like a company culture, how that would be changed through kind of like how the 6-foot rule and how, I guess, how people before who were really concerned about handshakes or something like Howie Mandel, who was like considered like a germaphobe or something, was really considered, wow, that's like weird that he doesn't want to shake anybody's hand. But now probably people wouldn't bat an eye if somebody didn't want to shake hands with you. So I can see how like those small restaurants, one thing I didn't think of when you said small restaurants was, you know, like the intimacy of a restaurant and how everybody's kind of packed around anyway, and you know, your server's really close to you and everybody's touching your food. But I didn't think of how the cash requirements and the small margins that those restaurants operate on, they probably can't sustain being shut for more than a couple weeks, and how that would it's going to be interesting to watch, and I don't think we know the full ramifications, but I think for sure it's gone on long enough, and there's been enough of an impact that I think, I don't think you'll ever look at a roll of toilet paper the same again, probably.
Yeah.
I think along those lines, we're very fortunate that the nature of our work and the access to technology we have allows us to work from home. But I think about, you probably have all seen this, the reports and the discussions of people talking about how they have all this, here's what to do with your extra time, right? There's a lot of discussion about, since you're at home, to keep you from getting bored or to keep you from going crazy, here's what you can be doing with your extra time to develop yourself or to prepare for what comes next, kind of thing. And I look at that and I'm like, who are these broad swaths of people that they're talking about that are sitting at home with, I'm definitely at home, but I'm very busy. I've been just totally booked morning till night throughout this. And so, but I think it speaks to the fact that it speaks to how fortunate we are to be able to continue our work from home, and that there is such a large portion of the population that are in service and other kinds of jobs that really so far heretofore have required that they be at the job location to actually do anything. And so now you've got a large portion of the population that actually is at home and doesn't necessarily have anything to do without their job being available to them. It's just a different perspective that I don't have. That's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I gotta say, I gotta second that, because there and a couple of other people call me about some of their free time, and I just think to myself, I have no idea what that's like, because I feel, there's always so much things on. But like you said, it's a blessing to be able to, do that from home and to not have that fear at this moment. And yeah, but I second that.
I have a friend that actually works in Detroit in metal fabrication, and he took a voluntary leave. And, he was in a fortunate enough position where he had money saved, where he was able to relinquish his job and allow somebody else to stay at work that really needed it. And he is one of those that is receiving unemployment and literally has nothing to do all day. And so I see him pop online on Xbox all day long, or if I look at him, he's been online for like 20 hours, so there is, and a lot of his friends and colleagues and all that are in the same boat. So they're, I think with the exception of us that had kind of set ourselves up, I think everything's ground to a halt in those kind of, I don't want to say manual labor, but those production jobs, those restaurant jobs, everything that's associated with. And you even think about Uber drivers where, they were afraid of automation. Now I'm wondering if the social stigma of being, in somebody's back seat would stop. Are people going to use public transportation after this is done? I can remember riding the Max and being elbow to elbow with everybody on there, during rush hour. Are people going to take that same kind of risk now, or look at like close confined quarters of public transportation, or even an Uber the same way?
Yeah, and those get hit double, because not only, like you're saying, do you have the risk of being close to so many other people, but also nobody wants to go to work more because they can't, and because so they're not using Ubers, they're not using the bus as much as they were. So yeah, that's a tough industry to be in right now.
But I think about the changes in business and industry, like back to your kind of the core of your question too, AJ, that I was doing an interview today. It'll be out on the podcasts with doctors Kim and Todd Saxton out of Indiana. They are researchers in entrepreneurship and have written a book called The Titanic Effect. And they were talking about I was asking them a broad variety of issues related to their expertise and how it related to the current crisis. And one of the things that we were talking about was the leaps of progression and evolution that online education, them being professors, that was something at the top of their mind, and also doing medical assessments and some sorts of counseling via webcast, like what we're doing here, or during videocast. Both online education and certain kinds of medical diagnoses or counseling sessions via webcast are examples of areas where the technology's already been available for a while, and there was a very slow moving trend to go that direction. But this whole crisis is like pushing that trend forward by years, right? It's like, it's going to jump years in terms of, because when you think about it, just think about like, we've all been to university, so we can speak to that issue that if you just think about that, there's more and more been people taking classes online. That's been a steady progression. A lot of people will do, it was already the case, a lot of people would do at least some of their coursework online, but now everyone's doing all of their coursework online, presumably, for the next few months. And so I think there's a question there of, okay, now that we've made that leap, do we backtrack? Or if we get to the point where we don't have to do so much social distancing, is that leap now done? Is it the case that a much bigger portion of education forevermore will be done online going forward now, and that this situation pushed that forward in that particular industry? And yeah,
it feels that way to me. I mean, only time will tell, but it definitely seems to be going that way from everything that I can tell. And because I think that once people get used to it, and once people just start to learn to live that way, then it'll become part of their nature more than it had been in the past.
And I continue to think, what does that mean for us and in professional services, where we could deliver a lot of our consulting and do a lot of our stuff online or through, especially finance related. Even though the technology has been available, it's an industry where people didn't necessarily want to do that kind of stuff online. Companies and individuals, they like looking somebody in the eye, and the trust of doing that in an online format hasn't been quite there yet, I think, across the broad spectrum. And are we going to see that this is moving that forward dramatically in a way that never goes back the other direction as well?
Yeah, I thought when you and I, Ty, were first talking about like kind of the social implications of this, I thought, if it, I think I was naive to think that, well, this will be over in a couple of weeks, and then nobody will have learned a lesson from this, or nobody will have changed their attitudes. But as this has gone on, I think it's going to take a long time to kind of get back to I don't think you get back to where we were before as far as people's mindset, but I definitely think it's gone on long enough where this will have permanent ramifications in how people interact in society, and how businesses are delivered, and what businesses are deemed, essential, I think, and which businesses survive this,
It really does bring up this kind of, it really does raise this question: what does being essential mean? And for those businesses that at the moment are not necessarily considered essential, or maybe they don't think they're considered essential, or maybe their customers don't necessarily think they're essential. That was another topic that I was talking with the professors out of Indiana about, and they use this term that I love about kind of the value void, and the challenge those businesses have right this minute is figuring out how to recast their value in a way that makes it essential, right? Don't get, and I think my natural inclination, like where my mind goes on this is, oh, if I'm in an unessential industry, or if my business is deemed through this process to be somewhat unessential at the moment, maybe I should be pivoting to entirely new industries that are looking like they're essential. But I think what I came out of that discussion with the professors being inspired about is, or maybe you figure out how to restate your value proposition in a way that makes it essential. It doesn't necessarily demand a wholesale change in your business. It just demands a difference in how you, it may demand some pivots in your business, but also in how you communicate and articulate to people why your business is more essential than they think it is.
Well, I think even to piggyback off that, I think that this time, if you're sitting there unemployed, or if you're sitting there in something that has been deemed an unessential business, I think this is a great time to, like you said, reevaluate how to deliver that value proposition, or evaluate where you can be an essential business and where you can try to recession-proof yourself. I mean, to use my own experience personally, during the Great recession of 2007-ish, that's how I became an accountant, was because I was out of business as a contractor, and I Googled the lowest unemployment rates, and lawyer was up there. I was like, ooh, CPA was up there as like a third. So I was like, well, how hard can that be? Does that sound interesting? And that's actually how I got into accounting.
That's
so,
fun. Yeah. Honestly, that was another big thing that got me into it too, was just like wanting to have job stability. And so, yeah, I think it's just a really good chance for everybody to look at what they do and think about how can we make ourselves not appear more essential, but, you know, market our services as an essential service, or is it time to think about something new in this new, you know, environment that we're in?
All right. Well, want to thank everyone again for joining us this episode of None of Our Businesses from our homes during the COVID-19 crisis. Another great roundtable discussion with Charlie Zygmunt, AJ Wheeler, and myself, Ty Carr. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Comment down below if there's things you would like us to cover or talk about in the future, or other ideas you have. Hit the likes and share this with your friends and family. Perhaps on your next Zoom call, tell people about the None of Our Businesses podcast. Okay, everyone, thank you, and we'll see you next time.
All right, see you.
Thank you.